After another day of Sacramento Kings training camp, Luke Walton says we're going to get another starting lineup in Game 3 of preseason coming next week. Of course, we're not supposed to be reading too far into these starting lineups, but it's clear Luke Walton is workshopping to try and figure out which rotations and which starting five works best for this Kings team long term. Someone who's been in the Sacramento Kings practice facility for training camp, talking to Luke Walton and the players about the starting lineup and the rotations is Jason Anderson from the Sacramento Bee. He joins me on today's podcast to share his thoughts on where he thinks Luke Walton and the Kings are leaning in terms of their starting five. He'll talk about Buddy Hield accepting a bench or starting role, the possibility of Marvin Bagley in the same situation, Mo Harkless or Tristan Thompson may be working their way into the starting lineup, and he provides an update on the Ben Simmons situation and the Sacramento Kings' interest in the former All-Star. It's all on today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of your Sacramento Kings from January through December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I've been a Sacramento sports media member, Sacramento Kings media member for the last 7 years. This will be my 8th season covering the Kings, formerly with Sports 1140 KHDK Radio in Sacktown, now with ABC 10 television. And I'm excited for you to listen to my conversation with Jason Anderson here today. But I wanted to thank you for making Locked On Kings your first listen here as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And I have a second listen for you. I'm not a San Francisco Giants fan. I'm an Oakland A's fan, which I'm very vocal about. But the Giants, they're playing the Dodgers in the playoffs. And of course, anytime it's Northern California versus Southern California, I'm going NorCal all the way. And I know in Sacramento and around the United States, there are a ton of San Francisco Giants fans. So do yourself a favor, make your second listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network today be Ben Kaspick from the Locked On Giants podcast as he prepares you for this historic series. The Giants and the Dodgers, two of the best teams in baseball. Their race in the NL West all season long comes down to their first ever playoff series against one another. It's bound to be exciting. You can get all your information on what the San Francisco Giants are doing before, after, during each one of these games from Ben Kaspick over on the Locked On Giants podcast. Before we get to my conversation with Jason Anderson, there's so much in this conversation that I want you to hear and that I think you are going to enjoy. I'm going to pay the bills early a little bit here. Then we'll get to JA. Today's podcast is brought to you by Sleeper. And the experts at Sleeper recognize that fantasy basketball was just broken. Games were being won and lost based off of whose players had more scheduled games that week. It had nothing to do really with their performance. It made no sense, required very little strategy. So in 2020, Sleeper released a brand new way of playing fantasy basketball. It's called Game Pick, and it's only available on Sleeper. In Game Pick, owners pick a single game per week for each of their starters to play towards their team's total score. It's like fantasy football. One game, those are the points that you get for that week. The days of losing because your opponent's players had more scheduled games to play in that week, those days are over. So are the days of mindless daily busy work that's usually associated with fantasy basketball. If you are a fantasy football fan, this brings fantasy football into fantasy basketball. It's week by week. You set your lineups, you pick your game, and that is that. So there's an extra even layer of strategy that you didn't even know existed. Whether you prefer redraft, keeper, or dynasty, Game Picks has you covered. You are going to love Game Picks. I encourage you to give it a try. Download the Sleeper app and start a league with your friends today. You will not be disappointed. From Sacramento Kings practice facilities for another day of training camp to a podcast recording, Sacramento Kings beat writer for the Sacramento Bee, Jason Anderson, back with us here on the Locked On Kings podcast. Jason, it's a pleasure to have you on, my friend. I hope you enjoyed this shortened offseason. I hope you're as excited as I am to get to what we hope will be the first regular Sacramento Kings season in basically 3 years. Welcome in, my friend.
Thanks, buddy. Fired up and ready to go.
So you're just now coming from the Kings practice facility. It's another day of training camp, 2 preseason games in the books, another 2 games to go. And I'm going to ask you about your takeaways from these preseason games in a little bit. But there were a couple things that you tweeted out, conversations from training camp so far today. And one of the big ones was Luke Walton talking about his starting lineups, 2 very different starting lineups from game 1 against Phoenix to game 2 against the Los Angeles Clippers. And he warned us ahead of time, don't read too far into these starting lineups. He's going to use these lineups to workshop some things. What have you thought about these lineups to this point, especially that very different lineup with the Los Angeles Clippers? The idea of Tristan Thompson potentially starting at the 5, Mo Harkless starting with Marvin Bagley, or rather Harrison Barnes at either the 3 or 4 spot. It seems like that's the biggest hole right now, that 3-4, depending upon where Harrison Barnes plays.
Yeah, I do think that's the big question mark is kind of what you do at the 3-4 spot. I asked Luke today if he had decided whether Harrison would start at the 3 or the 4, and he said no, he has not made that determination at this point. So there's a hole there, and some of that, kind of depends on what we see from guys like Marvin, guys like Mo Harkless, guys like Tristan Thompson. They give Luke some options in terms of what he wants to do there. But it's not a decision he's made. Harrison has played really the bulk of his minutes at the 4. Certainly last year, he was well over 50% of his minutes at the 4, even though he started at the 3. So as Harrison gets, on into his career a little more, a lot of people see him more as a stretch 4 now than a 3. Luke, if you just look at where he's played him and how much he does like him at the 4, I think Luke might be a subscriber to that theory. But HB is a versatile guy; he can play either spot. He's going to give Luke, kind of a nice option there. But really, what Luke has to decide is who fits best in that other spot.
Yeah, Harrison started last season at the 3, like you mentioned, Jason, and he got off to the best start of his career. And many don't think that's a coincidence. And I also don't think it's a coincidence that starting at the 3 spot against the Phoenix Suns, Harrison Barnes got off to a really good start. I think he had 12 or 14 points in the first half of that game. Now, you don't want to read too much into one preseason game against the Phoenix Suns team that was missing some important pieces, but Harrison seems to have success at that 3 spot when he's playing with Marvin Bagley and Rashawn Holmes at that 4 and 5, going back to the start of last season. In your mind, kind of a 2-part question here. Do you have any indication of Luke Walton leaning any one way or another? You kind of talked about it there, thinking that he's more of a subscriber to Harrison Barnes at the 4. And then you personally, having covered Harrison for the last couple of years, where do you think his ideal fit is with this current Kings team?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think HB is perfectly fine at the 3, and is also very good at the 4. I think the Kings could use 2 Harrison Barnes if they had 2 of them. I think they'd be in a little bit better position here. But there's only one, and if you are going to start Harrison at the 4, then you could be pretty undersized given what Luke's options will be at the 3. If that's the scenario that plays out, we're going to see a guy maybe like Buddy Hield, possibly at the 3. They could play Mo Harkless and Harrison together as a 3-4 combo, wherever you want to slot those guys in. I think Luke is a little bit limited in what he can do, just because they just don't have a lot of depth at that spot on the wing. And if you do decide that Harrison Barnes is your starting power forward, that has implications really up and down the roster in terms of other guys who are going to get minutes at the 4, and then how you're going to fill all those minutes at the 3 when you're really picking from guys like Buddy Hield and Terrence Davis and Tyrese Halliburton and guys who are guards. You're going to be asking them to match up against some significantly bigger guys there on the wing. So that's really what he has to decide. A lot of it's going to come down to, and Luke has said this repeatedly, rebounding, defense, They've really got to be able to rebound the ball if they're going to go with these small lineups. And, I think just by the nature of the way this roster is constructed, we're going to see quite a bit of those small lineups, even if they don't start the game that way.
You reported that Walton said earlier that we're going to see another different lineup combination or starting lineup combination in this third preseason game coming up on Monday. And again, fans shouldn't be reading too far into that because clearly he's workshopping a few things. But maybe one area that we can read into, and maybe we'll have a better indication of this based off of Monday's starting lineup. But Jason, in your mind, is there any reason to believe that De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Halliburton won't be the starting 1 and 2 in whatever order, won't be the starting backcourt for this Kings team come the start of the season? Are the days of Tyrese coming off the bench his rookie season, are those days done in your mind?
I think they are. We don't have confirmation of that. I asked Luke pretty directly recently if he was confident Tyrese was ready to step into that starting role. And Luke gave me an answer that sort of left the door open, and at this point in training camp, those are things that are just simply, under evaluation at this point. So I think Luke didn't want to get ahead of himself, but he's also talked about how much they have really smart players, high IQ players, and how much of a difference that makes. And, I think the writing is on the wall that they're ready to move into the era here where we're going to have Fox and Halliburton starting side by side.
So it sounds like, depending upon where Harrison Barnes plays, it's a 3-player race. Some may say 4 with Tristan Thompson, but I don't know if I necessarily believe that. It sounds like it's a 3-player race for that final playoff spot, or rather starting spot. It's either Buddy Hield, which we've seen him play the 3 before, and he had some success in limited stretches last year, but I'm skeptical that Buddy Hield is your long-term solution at the starting 3 spot is not necessarily a recipe for long-term success. There's Marvin Bagley, who started a lot at the 4, and we've already seen him in the starting lineup, although there's obvious off-the-court complications with that, not to mention he's not the most reliable guy on the planet because he can't stay really on the floor for a long period of time. And then there's Mo Harkless, who's still relatively new to the team. We saw the potential for that hybrid wing lineup, but there are also question marks there. Out of those 3, you personally leaning towards one, or do you think there's an extra confidence level in one over the other 2 just because maybe they're performing well in training camp and preseason, or they're more reliable based off of their relationship with Luke Walton and their history with Luke Walton? Any of those 3 jump off the page?
No, I need to see more. I think I like Luke and his staff, I think I need to see more of that too. I don't mind really. I think I would not have a problem if you wanted to go Fox, Halliburton, Barnes, Bagley, Holmes, or Fox, Halliburton, Buddy Hield, Harrison Barnes, and Rashawn Holmes. I think those are maybe the 2 most likely possibilities right now. I don't think there's a perfect option. Marvin, I really want to see him prove it. I want to see him active, engaged, playing good team basketball, adhering to team concepts, things of that nature. Buddy, the question, becomes is just how well suited he is for the 3 due to his size. He's about 6'4", but he's 6'20", he's 220 and really pretty strong. Not the best length, not the best lateral quickness, not ideally suited for the 3, but there was some evidence last year that he held his own better defensively at the 3 than he did at the 2. So, I think that certainly is a possibility if they decide to go that way. But I'm not convinced one way or the other at this point.
You've built a very unique relationship with Buddy Hield over the last couple of seasons. And a couple seasons ago, he was not afraid to say publicly and voice his displeasure. Last season did better to hide it, even though there were those Buddy Hield facial expressions, smiles, and moments in press conferences where we knew that he wasn't necessarily too happy with things. Once again, at least during media day, Buddy Hield was saying the right thing, saying he's going to do whatever the team needs him to do and will do whatever they ask of him. But at the same time too, Jason, as well as I do, Buddy wants to be a starter on this team. Buddy thinks he's one of the best players on this team, and being a starter matters to him. Also, being a closer matters to him. So based off of your understanding of Buddy Hield and how he's grown over the last couple of seasons, if the Kings decide to go to a starting lineup that doesn't feature him too often, and maybe the closing lineup doesn't feature him too often unless the Kings need some quick 3-pointers to get back into a game or secure a win, how do you think Buddy handles that this season? Do you believe him when it's I'm just going to do whatever the team needs, put my head down, do my job?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Buddy has a very playful personality, and people who don't get to spend a lot of time around him may misinterpret certain things. And, certainly some of his comments and positions he took in the past, ruffled some feathers within the organization and outside the organization. But Buddy, a lot of that is just Buddy's nature and kind of his sarcasm a lot of times coming out, which is fun. Right now, I would say I think Buddy is in a really good space mentally. He's told us, I want to start. Everybody wants to start, but he's willing to do whatever his coaches ask him to do. And we've heard a lot of, and I'll say this for Marvin as well. We've heard a lot more of a lot less I and a lot more we, and a focus on the team and making the team better and doing what the team needs. And I think that's got to be really refreshing for Luke and his staff, and really everybody in the organization to hear that. Buddy is, I do believe he's committed to just, fitting his role here. I'm not, there's no certainty he's going to start this year. In fact, I'd say it's a pretty big question mark. And he seems to be, I think he's going to be okay with it if he's in a backup role. I think that bench unit has the potential to be really exciting, and a strength for this team. And, he really could be a huge part of that. And I think he would probably thrive in that role if that's what they do. So we'll see. Time will tell. And as we all know, if things get off to a bad start, if the losses start to pile up, then you end up with some difficult situations sometimes, and not everybody is as happy as you are when you're winning games. So we'll see how it all plays out. But right now, I'd say Buddy's in a good place.
Today's Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by our friends at betonline.ag. Back and better than ever, betonline.ag is already making you cash in on this NFL season. All eyes are on the gridiron as teams are back for another year of football. As always, BetOnline is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. With a new updated site and interface, even more odds, prompts, and contests, BetOnline continues to be the number one source for everything football and basketball too, of course. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Don't forget to use promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. It's going to be a fantastic way for you to play along with Kings basketball all season long, from football to basketball, boxing, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season at BetOnline, where the game starts. And after you've won all that on BetOnline, use just a small chunk of it over at Built Bar. You can get yourself a box of basically candy bars that are healthy for you. Built Bars are the protein bars that are covered in 100% chocolate, soft, easy to chew, absolutely delicious. Comes in a wide variety of flavors, so you will not get bored with them. Flavors like coconut, raspberry. My favorite is mint brownie, also double chocolate, salted caramel, strawberry, orange, cookies and cream, and more. These bars are delicious. 17 to 18 grams of protein, calories ranging from 130 to 180. That's it. And only 4 to 5 grams of sugar, only 4 to 5 grams of net carbs. All these amazing flavors, tasty and healthy. You can order today on built.com. Get yourself a mixed box to try all these different flavors out. Then you can go back to built.com when you order your second box, pick and choose the flavors that you love, and have them sent to you every single week, every other week. Do what my wife and I do, and you'll become addicted very, very quickly. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your order. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, but on draft night, I believe you asked Monty McNair after their selection of Davion Mitchell about where Mitchell fits in as a guard with Fox and Halliburton already here, not to mention Buddy Hield. You asked about how he fits into the rotation, and Monty, I thought, had a good answer, even though it's pretty vague. He said, our best players are going to play. And we've seen during preseason that Luke Walton is workshopping different 3-guard sets. Davion, Fox, and Halliburton we've seen in small stretches, as well as the implementation of Buddy Hield and Terrence Davis and other guards like that. But if Davion is going to be what they're hoping that he's going to be, there's going to be an expectation of a certain amount of minutes eventually. I don't know if I'm expecting him to play starter or heavy, even 6-man minutes immediately as a rookie, but maybe by the end of the season or a second, third year in the league, he's looking more in those high 20s, maybe low 30s in terms of minutes played. I wonder how that works long-term in Sacramento with Fox and Halliburton already here. And I wonder how early we might see Davion Mitchell as part of that closing lineup on the floor. I have a hard time believing, depending upon fouls and who's playing on a nightly basis and matchups, that Fox and Halliburton too often are going to be off the floor during that fourth quarter. So if Davion's going to be on, that means guys like Buddy Hield are on the bench and the Kings are going small. How do you feel about the possibility of that, both short-term and long-term, and the ability for the Sacramento Kings to be successful with Davion Mitchell as part of that star closing lineup?
Well, I'm interested to see it like everybody else. I don't know how that's going to work, how you allocate the minutes, how you get all those guys, enough minutes. Davion, I will say, has been incredible defensively, especially, and really has shown quite a bit offensively as well already. And, these are preseason games. You qualified it in the summer league by saying these are summer league games. You qualify it now by saying these are preseason games. Pretty soon they won't be, and we're really going to see what that looks like in a regular season game against real NBA competition. But Davion, I'll say this, his combination of just strength and balance and focus and tenacity is something that this team needs. He is a game changer on defense. For a team that desperately has to get better on defense. And I think you need him out there. He played 24 minutes, I believe, in the first preseason game. He played 26 against the Clippers. And I don't know that I want him playing any less than that. I mean, I want him out there heating up somebody with the ball in their hands and, really just causing the kind of disruption that he brings to the floor. And, I think the Kings are going to want that too. So, whether it's right away or later in the season or a year from now, they are going to face some questions with those 3 guards, Fox, Halliburton, and Mitchell. How do they fit together? How do you stagger them? How do you play them together? I don't know, but I'm fascinated to see how it plays out and what they do.
The Kings made some slight additions this offseason, Davion Mitchell being the biggest one, but also the signing of Alex Lennon and trading for Tristan Thompson, not to mention bringing back Rashawn Holmes, which is a big deal, bringing back Mo Harkless, Terrence Davis. But for the most part, a lot are saying that this Kings team, they're kind of running it back. The main core from last season is back here this season. And of course, last season, as have the last 15 seasons, the Kings failed to make the playoffs. Of course, they started last season with significantly less depth than they have right now, which of course is important for a full season, assuming this team can stay healthy. But Jason, I'm not just talking play-in, because I think that's the most clear route for the Sacramento Kings, but it's about making the playoffs. Monty McNair and Luke Walton have made that very clear. That is the goal for this team, to make the playoffs. And in my mind, anything less will be a failure for this team. With the subtle moves that this team has made during the offseason, and a big trade could be coming, and I'm going to ask you about Ben Simmons to wrap up this interview in just a second. But with everything that they've done, is it enough in your mind to say, okay, this team can actually make the playoffs? Have they done enough for you to have maybe not that confidence, but that belief?
Well, I mean, that's why we play 82. I don't know enough right now to say that. I have a hard time just projecting them as a top 6 team.
Yeah.
Right now, I think there are clearly 6 teams that are probably ahead of them, assuming that the Warriors are in that mix, and that Clay is right with his return from injury. That's assuming that Portland stays at the level they're at, barring, trades there or injuries there, which they've been just really hit hard by in recent years. So nothing is certain. And one or more of those teams could fall, and that could open the door for a team like Sacramento, perhaps, to make a jump up there. I do think, it's far more likely we see them scratching and clawing and fighting for one of those 7, 8, 9, 10 spots. And if that's the case, you're looking at teams like Memphis and New Orleans and, possibly Minnesota or San Antonio, or, I think the Kings could be better than a couple of those teams. So there's a path. But it's really, a lot of it's going to depend on some of the things Luke has talked about with this roster and these lineups, and how well they defend, how well they rebound. They want to really limit offensive rebounds for the opponents. It's something they've struggled with. And as bad as they've been defensively, they really have to close out possessions on defense and not give teams second and third opportunities. So, this is a team where, they say all the little things matter. And, this is a team where I really think that's going to be true. Every little thing, every little detail is going to factor into the success that this team has. And I think they're going to be right there, on kind of the margins after 82 games, but we'll see.
Finally, Jason, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Monte McNair and the Kings are aggressive during the regular season to try for that swing for the fences move, especially if they get to the trade deadline and they're right in that play-in or maybe even playoff mix. And maybe Buddy Hield and Harrison Barnes or Marvin Bagley turn into major trade chips for the Kings at the deadline to be able to make some kind of big all-in move right like that. Of course, we've heard a lot of rumors and a lot of conversation regarding the Kings' interest in Ben Simmons. However, that's quieted down significantly over the last few weeks. And I just wanted to get your feel of this situation. Have things quieted down essentially because Monty has made it known that Fox and Halliburton, and maybe even Davion Mitchell, but we've heard Fox and Halliburton are not to be involved in this deal, and the Daryl Morey and the Philadelphia 76ers continue to be significantly stubborn with their high asking price for Ben Simmons, who is willing to say goodbye to $8+ million so that he doesn't have to show up and play for that team anymore going forward. Is that really where we're at? Just kind of a stalemate, assuming the Kings still have interest, but they're not going to jump the gun?
Yeah, I think so. And I do think that we're sort of on standby for that swing for the fences move from Monte McNair. I think he's looking for it. He's looking for that pitch, but he wants to stay within the strike zone, if you know what I mean. He doesn't want to he doesn't want to swing for the fence outside the strike zone.
Yeah.
And so Monty's a focused guy. He's a very, as we all know, he's very analytically minded. He does want to make a big move. He comes from a Rockets organization where they made big moves, that they just made a ton of big moves, and I think he's going to be looking for that. I think Ben Simmons I don't think the door is completely closed on that. We're hearing that the talks have quieted down between Sacramento and Philadelphia. They haven't spoken in some time, but I guess what I would say to that is that Monty and Daryl know each other extremely well from their time in Houston together. Daryl knows what Monty is willing to put on the table. And I don't think I think there are tiers to the kinds of offers that Philly is willing to entertain. The Kings are not in that top tier. They're not plan A. But frankly, the plan A is probably Damian Lillard, and they're not going to get Damian Lillard unless something happens over the course of the season and Dame, starts to demand a trade out of Portland. So, that I don't think that's going to happen. In my mind, here's how I think it goes. I think Dame is plan A, or somebody like Kyrie or Bradley Beal, somebody who's a ball handler, a leader, a floor general. I think that's plan A. If you can't get that, you move to plan B, which is maybe guys like CJ McCollum. If you can get the Portland Trailblazers to part with him instead of Dame. And then if, a deal like that doesn't materialize, you move into the next tier, and eventually the Sixers are going to have to take something, right? I mean, they are. I know they want a big return, but if they move into that next tier down, that's where I think the Sacramentos and the Minnesotas are. You can argue about who can make the best offer in that group of teams. But I think Sacramento potentially puts a really competitive offer on the table still. So I'm not convinced that is the door is completely closed on that, but it does seem like there is a little bit of a stalemate and a waiting game right now.
Well, Locked On Kings listeners, if I didn't ask a question for Jason Anderson that you wanted to ask, you can submit your questions right now as he's doing one of his many mailbags with the Sacramento Bee. Jason also provides all season long, all off season, fantastic written content, and the subscription at the Sacramento Bee to get that content is more than worth the money that you pay. It's a subscription that you must have, really, if you are following Sacramento Kings basketball. Jason, it's always a pleasure to have you on. I look forward to doing it again soon. I look forward to being able to see you at the Golden One Center to cover what will hopefully be finally the season of Sacramento Kings basketball to end this extremely long drought. And I think there's more than enough reason from a media standpoint and from a fan standpoint to be excited about this team, at least based off of what we've seen in training camp and in preseason.
Yeah, you'd love to see it, Matt. Thanks for your time, man. Good to be with you.
It was a pleasure having Jason Anderson back here on Locked On Kings. Some fascinating stuff. I want to hear your thoughts on the Kings starting lineup. Who would you start? How would you implement Davion Mitchell? How many minutes do you want Davion Mitchell playing right away? Your thoughts on Marvin Bagley and Buddy Hield. Should they be incorporated into the starting lineup? Should they not? How much faith you have in both of them to truly put their head down and just accept their role? And also your thoughts on the Ben Simmons sweepstakes. Are you completely out on the idea of Ben Simmons here in Sacramento? Are you willing to renegotiate if you're from a Kings perspective and maybe make one of De'Aaron Fox, Tyrese Halliburton, or Davion Mitchell available? I think the majority of you are saying no, but hey, maybe if the Kings continue to play this waiting game, that asking price comes down. And like Jason was telling there, maybe it gets to that point where the Sixers are willing to accept like a third tier package that the Kings are trying to offer. So we'll have to wait and see. But right now, even if the Kings don't land Ben Simmons, there's more than enough reason to be optimistic about this team. I want to hear your responses, so make sure you reach out to me. You can reach me on Twitter at MattGeorgeSac. That's SAC. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. Or if you're watching on YouTube, leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you for another great week here of the Locked On Kings podcast. I hope you tuned in for all 5 episodes. If you did not, had a great conversation yesterday with Sean Cunningham. Covered a lot of different things this week. Also, if you haven't heard De'Aaron Fox's comments on Davion Mitchell, calling him a top 5 all or NBA defender, on ball defender already, you need to hear that. Plus my thoughts on that, my thoughts on the win against Phoenix, my thoughts on the win against the LA Clippers, all from this week for you to go and catch up on, check out, get you through the weekend. And then next week, of course, we'll be back for more Kings content, getting ready for these final 2 preseason games. And of course, the start of the regular season, which will be here sooner than we know it. So thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you. I can't wait to have you join me next time. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.